with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. I remember when I first read this poem, when I first heard this poem, I thought that has been some of my experiences with poetry, this sense of wanting to tie it to a chair and beat a confession out of it. And so we want to encourage our students to have a different approach to that. So for those who may have just joined us, please feel free to pop in questions in the Q&A. I would love to actually engage with you rather than just to be the one that's talking. So we're going to use the space to have the conversation, and as much of a two-way conversation as we possibly can. And I see there's already a number in there. Fantastic. All right, I'm going to come back to those. So just to get us in the mood, I'm going to read a poem that I wrote a number of years ago that was to encourage young readers to read. I'm going to read it twice, and we're going to do something different for each reading. So where you are, we're going to start thinking a little bit about body knowledge, and as body is the authority of knowledge. And so wherever you are, just be comfortable. If you're sitting down, if you're lying in bed, if you're sitting in the car, wherever you may be, I just want you to close your eyes and listen as I read, and then I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of guidance on how we're going to respond to the poem. All right, because it's very important to think about the auditory experience of poetry as something that needs to be heard. All right, so this is where you are. Just get comfortable and let's close our eyes. For the constellations in your palm. Oh, to see planets pressed on pages, to follow their orbit from imprint to contents pages, for a chance to converse with sages and watch as the human spirit rages through the ages and angels march up and down margins, waiting for us to join them. With every flick of a page, we harness telescope sentences, turn them inside out, only to discover that irises are not dark holes, but portals into galaxies and universes where we spin with time, towards time, away from time, and realize that aliens do exist right there, somewhere behind ellipses. And I'm convinced that God moves in the blank pages between chapters and spaces between sentences where ink cannot quite capture mystery. It is a mystery. For the occasional visitor, the book is a planetarium, which draws them in and attention is enraptured until they leave. But for those of us whose home address is the printed page, the book is a tattooist. The cosmos inked onto our brains, tongues pierced with Saturn's rings, dwarf and giant stars live and die in our throats. Our pores leak stardust from Sunday strolls on the Milky Way. We are space and imagination made human. These worlds find their expression in the irony of two covers made for digging and discovery. Each word is a gem to be held up against the light, day and night, placed under solar then lunar scrutiny. But I suspect that those with diminished sight are best placed to understand the texture of language underneath their fingertips. They know what it means to have Mars pressed under your pinky, to caress the sun and leave your fingerprints on asteroids and abandoned moons. Every child deserves to know this bliss, to look around at the darker pull of gravity on the soul and be reminded of the rockets parked in their eyes, to know that to launch into a book through its spine is not to escape, but to learn how to recreate the world around them. Now, usually in a session like this, I would just let the poem simmer and let the feeling sort of spread through the room and allow the students to take in what they've just heard. It's always good to have a kind of dynamic feeling to the space between action and sound and movement and silence, and let the words move into that space. Because what's happening is in their minds, as we all know, they're already starting to connect to so many other things. But I like to leave it with no expectations and let them listen to the poem for what it tells them rather than what they anticipate you're going to ask of them. Now I'm going to read it again, but this time, wherever you are, if you have something to write with, please grab it. Or even here in the chat, we can actually drop things in the chat, our responses to the poem. If you are an artist, this is a great time if you've got pen and pencil and a piece of paper where you can actually sketch something or draw something or paint something, whatever it is, in response to this poem. So again, there are no boundaries, there are no parameters within which you work, but it's just that initial response, that visceral response to the words of the poem. So I think usually the issue that we have is around access into language. And so I want to invite you to just find the words that resonate with you, the things that they trigger for you, and that's what you're going to share. So as I'm reading again, just drop words into the chat box and I'm going to go through them. So what speaks to you? What speaks to you? We're not thinking about metaphors. We're not thinking about, is that a coda? Nothing, just what you feel. So I'm going to read again, just a moment to find your writing utensils or whatever it is. And let's keep going together on this journey. All right. For the constellations in your palm. Oh, to see planets pressed on pages, to follow their orbit from imprint to contents pages. For a chance to converse with sages and watch as the human spirit rages through the ages, and angels march up and down margins waiting for us to join them. With every flick of a page, we harness telescope sentences, turn them inside out, only to discover that irises are not dark holes, but portals into galaxies and universes where we spin with time, towards time, away from time, and realize that aliens do exist right there behind ellipses. I'm convinced that God moves in the blank pages between chapters and spaces between sentences where ink cannot capture mystery. It is a mystery for the occasional visitor. The book is a planetarium, which draws them in and attention is enraptured until they leave. But for those of us whose home address is the printed page, the book is a tattooist. The cosmos inked onto our brains, tongues pierced with Saturn's rings, dwarf and giant stars live and die in our throats. Our pores leak stardust from Sunday strolls on the Milky Way. We are space and imagination made human. These worlds find their expression in the irony of two covers. They are made for digging and discovery. Each word is a gem, to be held up against the light, day and night, placed under solar, then lunar scrutiny. But I suspect that those with diminished sight are the best placed to understand the texture of language underneath their fingertips. They know what it means to have Mars pressed under your pinky, to caress the sun and leave your fingerprints on asteroids and abandoned moons. Every child deserves to know this bliss, to look around at the darker pull of gravity on the soul, and to be reminded of the rockets parked in their eyes, to know that launching into a book through its spine is not to escape, but to learn how to recreate the world around them. All right. So in that moment, what I really think is important is to simply start from a place of openness and to let go of those limitations. It's to launch, just as the poem says, it's to launch yourself with no sense of the depth of the water, with no sense of what might be in there, but it's the freedom, or that freedom of abandonment, and just throwing yourself with anticipation that you're going to discover something new. For me, when I think about teaching poetry or sharing poetry or discovering poetry together. It's about bringing the world of the students in to the poem, but bringing them into a new world as well. So I just want to see I'm going to read, because now what you have is you have multiple departure points for your discussion. Now that you've asked them, all right, if there are some people that are artists, they can share their sketches, they can start saying, all right, so when I heard this line, this is what I was thinking of, or this is the kind of tone that emerged. I mean, they may not say this is the tone that emerged, but however they may frame it, what you've done now is you've kind of created this visual experience to what's happening in the text of the poetry. For those who are maybe musicians, if there's a song that it's triggered for them, that can help you to think about tone, to think about the mood of the poem. Because sometimes when you ask the student, what is the mood, they're not able to find the right words to be able to explain what it is that they've experienced. But if you use other media that they have at their disposal to respond to the poem, then you start opening up that experience again, rather than making it terrifying as poetry is sometimes seen. And I love when we give them space to simply respond, to find words, incomplete thoughts, because those are discussion points that you can then bring into the classroom session. It's also really great for thinking about where the knowledge gaps may be. So for example, there are things that we take for granted. There's a mention of a planetarium, being able to move through the planetarium and experience all of these things, but there may be students in the classroom who have never been to a planetarium, who have no sort of social or cultural frame of reference to understand what that experience is. And there's an opportunity to then send them home and say, hey, go and do some research about what a planetarium is. Or what I like to do as well, especially now that we're teaching on Zoom, is to play a video. I say, right, so we're gonna take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we're going to go and do some research, come back, I'm gonna play a little clip, and then we start bringing the students into a new world that they may not know. I just want to, because I've asked everyone to respond, I'm going to read some of the responses here. Ooh, I love these. What I also want you to tell us is what's happening in your head. What is the poem allowing you to see, as well as what the poem is allowing you to feel. And I'll come back to feeling in just a moment. Thank you to the person who says poetry is beautiful. I agree, it's beautiful. And I would love when we can share that appreciation with the students instead of terrifying them. And the importance of respecting the unknown, the mystery, the magic. I don't know if everyone can hear just how excited I am. I cannot believe that I get to work with poetry every single day of my life. And it's that privilege, understanding that privilege that I try and share with my students as well. So someone, Rita says, getting lost in the words, the art, the creativity, it's a journey. And I understand, as I've said earlier, that sometimes we can get bogged down by the admin side of things, or the assessment, whatever the outcomes must be. But I always believe that the pathway to that can be a pathway through feeling as well. When I was, because I studied English literature at university, and I remember being told, we're not, the question is not whether or not this is a good poem, but it's about being able to analyze. It's about being able to unpack. And what I've realized in doing the work is that we have to make space for feeling, because the body is a site of knowledge. And sometimes I feel we're not able to bring enough of that into the classroom. That's why the first thing I do when I'm teaching is to simply get on my feet. And maybe that's the drama influence, but it's to get on our feet and read to each other. I get the students to read the poetry to each other and allow them to hear it mediated through their own voices as something that's accessible. So to really think about the body as a site of knowledge, to bring in the senses and say, what are you hearing? What can you taste in this poem? What are the things that speak to, I mean, there was a moment there that speaks about our tongues pierced with Saturn's rings. That's I mean, that's obviously a physical impossibility, but thinking about how that relates to taste, how it relates to touch, how it relates to smell. So bringing in the body as a site of knowledge, bringing it as an instrument or a barometer that allows us to think about mood, that allows us to think about tone within the text. And for me, once we start engaging the body, we lift the text from the page and we bring it to life for the students. I could talk for hours, truly, but I do want to quickly jump into the Q&A and see what some of the questions are, and then we can come back to any other conversation. Please keep putting in those responses, the things that you're thinking, just words. If you can even put in your own little poem that may be inspired, I would love to see that. I would love to read any stanzas that may come up, because that's what I also open it up for the students to say, hey, now that you've read this, go and write your own poem. Don't worry, we'll come back to form and thinking about all of those things. Just go and write your own poem as it's been inspired by this. And also showing them that there is a link between reading and writing. Something that I always try and emphasize is the importance of reading. And so my students know that in order to write poems, they've got to read poems. It's important for them to learn. All right, I'm going to jump into the Q&A. Okay, first question, how important is spelling in poetry? Bonita, I don't know if you're in here. How important is spelling in poetry? For me, the answer is very simple. It's always about intention. It's always about intention. If you want to change and subvert language by changing spelling, then go for it. I mean, we think about Shakespeare and how much he created. We think about, I was watching something the other day, they're speaking about Chaucer and how he was just making up the spelling of words because those words had not existed at the time. So if it's intentional, it's about the subversion of language. You could write a poem about changing the spelling of a word. So there are opportunities right there to do something interesting, to do something exciting. But other than that, encourage the students to have the correct grammar as much as they can. I find it difficult to incorporate poetry in my classroom. Help me out for grade 3. All right, so I don't know if anyone was in Yvette's session just before this about integrating the different art forms. I really encourage going and actually watching that, because I learned something from there as well. But to go and look at how we can actually link the different art forms. With poetry, one of the easiest things is certainly through music. So nursery rhymes, for much younger students, bringing in, have them bring their favorite song into the classroom and then look at the lyrics and look at it as poetry. Unless it's maybe mumble rap, you may not find a lot of poetry in mumble rap. But if bring in music. Start thinking about if you're having your art class, for example, is there a way in which they can write about what they're seeing, and so you can start thinking like a poetic response to what they're seeing. One of the things that we, a number of artists have done, just in terms of practice, sometimes we'll have a poetry session and we'll have an artist in the space who's painting while we perform. So there's that relationship of responding to the poetry through the painting or through sketching. So there's an opportunity to go in the other direction and say, we're going to put up, here's a painting, or project a sketch or something. Or even, again, using audiovisual material, and then to say, hey, now we're going to write a little poem about what that is, and to give them a frame of reference, give them examples of existing poetry. If they're writing about what happened over the holidays, I had some students that I was asking them to write about their experience of COVID and what they were hoping the future would be after COVID. So experiences as well are a really great prompt. Google is our best friend. Google, there has fantastic poetry prompts that you can incorporate into your classroom as well. And I've even seen, I think there was mention of mathematics and dance in one of the other sessions. I've seen teachers being able to teach maths through the creative arts. So poetry, if you're thinking about using a certain rhyme scheme to try and teach a new concept, all of those options are there. And it really depends on whether you want to bring the poetry to the students or you want them to start writing some poetry as well. I hope that answers the question. Yes, so I think I've answered for Shireen. I've answered that question around the ways in which art can be linked to poetry. If I haven't, please let me know, and I can add some more ideas. Because for me, it's just about sharing more ideas. I find I've got difficulty of adding. How do I take the fear? Ooh, this is a good one. How do I take the fear out of writing poems? I think the first thing is this the fear of the teacher or the students? What I like to do is to model for the students. To take the fear is to show them that you are as anxious as they are, and not to be afraid to look silly in front of the students, to look, to look a little bit uncertain, and that's to write with them. To write with them and be able to. But when we experience the process, we also start finding a language to speak about it to someone else. So for the teachers who are maybe thinking, oh, okay, this is, I'm not sure how to, write with them. Have a session where you write together and you talk about what the difficulties were, and unpack. And I think that makes it, that almost humanizes the process when they see that even the teacher may have certain challenges, and then go on the journey of how to find ways of bringing in creative and interesting solutions to that particular challenge. I think it's important for me. The way I see it certainly is that we're not all knowing, and I think it does help the students when we can show that level of vulnerability, and it allows them space for them to share their own vulnerability and to be okay with writing. I think for every poem that I publish or that I actually perform, there are, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 that will never see the light of day, that are incomplete, that are never going to work. Sometimes I write a poem, but only one line is good. And I use that line to start as a seed to write a different poem. So it's showing them that the process is, I always say it's about process, not product. Rather than aiming for perfection, it's how we're transformed through the process of working through that fear. I hope that's helpful. Again, if it's not, just pop in. Name an author of poem. The first poem was Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. And the second poem was For the Constellation in Your Palms, For the Constellations in Your Palm, rather, For the Constellations in Your Palm by Siphokazi Jonas. So that was me. We're about to run out of time. When drama students perform in playmaking improvised drama, can mother tongue be used that is not part of the LOLT as formal assessment? All right, Marlene, I have very strong feelings about this. That may not be the official stance of the education department. 5 seconds, 5 minutes, no time. Oh, sorry, Pam, you're on mute. I think you're on mute again. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear. I'm sorry, Pam, can you hear me? I don't know what's going on. Am I the only one struggling with sound? All right. So I think what we'll say, I'm assuming we're running out of time, but I'm going to try and catch up on these questions as I go along, and I'm going to try and respond as we go through the rest of the session. I am on social media. So if Siphokazi Jonas, so you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we can continue the conversation. And through, I think the session will be up for another month or so. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope that it has, just spot something in you that says, actually, you know what? I'm going to go for it. Bring your craziest ideas into the classroom. And I think we'll all be pleasantly surprised. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the sessions.